So welcome to those of you have already signed in. We have 79 people who registered and about half have already signed in. So I'm going to give a little time for everybody else to catch up and sign in. So while we're waiting for them, I'm going to make some uh, um, announcements. Um, First of all, Leitmotive has just been mailed out. You should receive it shortly if you haven't already. I would like to thank the editorial staff headed by Johan Biren and including Peter Fellman, Emma Popek, Teresa Concepcion, and Stuart Silverman for putting out a spectacular, impressive, and visually stunning issue, just like the previous ones. It's really a feather in our cap as far as I'm concerned. The other American Wagner societies don't even come close to matching the quality of Leitmotive with their own publications. The quality of the articles matches and even surpasses those found in major academic publications. And the current issue is definitely one that you will not only enjoy reading, but that you will want to save for posterity and future reference. I've had a few members uh, ask me why they didn't receive a mailed invitation to the Cosmo party. Um, in case you hadn't noticed, we've actually been avoiding mailing anything this year. Postage has gone up to 78 cents, first class postage, 78 cents. When you add in the cost of the printed material, getting things printed up, the envelopes, and add a 78-cent stamp on top of that, it means that it's going to cost the society well over $1 to mail out information that can be sent out for completely free by email. Not to mention that the snail mail involves a lot of licking of envelopes, and we don't have a staff to do that. We're an entirely volunteer board, and our tongues get dry after licking all those envelopes. So um, as much as possible, we're going to be sticking with email for all communications, whether they're party invitations or notices or meeting announcements. So please make a point of checking your email box regularly. On the outside chance that you have not been receiving our email, it is possible that our email might be sitting in your spam folder with when emails are sent out to multiple addresses. Sometimes that's considered by some email servers to be spam, and so they direct it to the spam folder. The best way to avoid that is to put our address, Wagner Society NC at Wagner SOCNC at gmail.com, into your contact address list, and that way your email server will know that it's not spam. One of the recent emails that you just received was a notice that we've started our election process for the board of directors. Please vote. The election will be going on. You'll be able to vote for a period of about 2 weeks. I would like to take this opportunity to thank Karen Gabrielson and Rebecca Liao, who are retiring from the board, on which they served admirably and showed their love and dedication to the society and its members through their work and their dedicated service to the Wagner Society. Please join me in thanking them for their service. We have, in the election, we have 4 incumbents running, including myself and Emma and Bill Frumming and Peter Fellman. And we have 2 uh, newcomer, 2 non-incumbents who are vying for positions on the board, Dr. Anne Marie Cantwell and Dr. Steve Schlaudover. Keep in mind that you can vote for up to 6 candidates, or you can put in a write-in the write-in would count as one candidate. Emma has already put on the screen some of our upcoming meetings. On November 1st, we will have Professor Thomas Gray, who will be speaking about outside and inside sacred spaces in Parsifal. This will be at the Jewish Community Center at the corner of California and Presidio in San Francisco. The meeting starts at 1 o'clock. Not to be missed, absolutely not to be missed. If you miss it, you will regret it your entire life that you missed it. You will kick yourself that you missed it. Our 2025 Cosima Wagner holiday celebration brunch featuring special guest Helden tenor Klaus Florian Vogt. There may be some of you who do not know him because he does not sing in the United States. He has sung only at the Metropolitan Opera. He has never appeared on the West Coast. To my knowledge, he's never appeared west of New York City. He's very well known in Europe. He's probably the most premier Helden tenor of our age right now, especially in Europe. He has sung virtually every major Wagnerian Helden tenor role. And what is different about him, he has a very distinctive voice. There are certain singers that you know who that singer is as soon as they start singing. If you hear a recording of them, you know that that's such and such a singer. Other singers you can't really tell sometimes. But Maria Callas, for example, John Vickers, when they open their mouths, you know who's singing. When Klaus Florian Vogt opens his mouth, you know it's him. He has a very distinctive voice, one that has never been matched, and probably one that never will be matched. So he is going to be presenting a Wagner concert for us. And if you miss it, the only chance that you will have of hearing him will be if you buy a very expensive plane ticket and fly to Germany or elsewhere in Europe, and then also buy a very expensive opera ticket. Then, if you're lucky, because it'll probably be a sold out performance, you'll get a ticket and you'll be able to hear him. We're expecting this performance in San Francisco at our Cosima party to be sold out. So buy your tickets now. The other reason to buy your tickets now is because the only people who've been informed right now of this party, the information has only gone out to our members so far. Our members are welcome to book for themselves or their non-member guests, but right now the price is cheaper. Once we start advertising to the public, which we're going to start doing October 25th, we have no way on our website of differentiating between members and non-members who are signing up. And so we wanted to give the members a lower price. So we're keeping the price cheaper during this period that only members were informed of it. So you can get the cheaper price for yourself or your non-member guest. Once the public is informed, the price is going up for everybody, including members. So the price is $200 right now. It's going up to $225. So if you don't want to spend an extra $25, book it now. And book it now while seats are available, because I wouldn't be surprised that by the time we open it up to the members, to the public, it's going to sell out. So book it now. If you don't book, believe me, you will regret it. Moving on. It's not on the screen. It hasn't been posted yet. Formally, it is on our webpage. I forgot to say, by the way, the Vogt party, getting back to the Cosmo party, it's not going to be recorded, unlike some of our other meetings. It's not going to be recorded. So that's the other reason you better buy a ticket, because you're not going to get a chance to see it on our website afterwards. Moving on. Saturday, January 24th, we will have another in-person meeting at the Jewish Community Center at 1 o'clock, featuring Professor Richard Cox from the San Francisco Conservatory of Music. He's going to lecture us he's a voice teacher, so he's going to lecture us on teaching voice with special attention to Wagner. On Saturday, February 14th at 1 o'clock, uh, join us for a Zoom session with Peter Phillips, who's the president of the Wagner Society of New York, who will discuss his book entitled Performing Wagner, A Singer's Perspective on the Major Tenor Roles, which he co-authored with world-renowned Helden tenor Stephen Gould, who you may know was a common feature in Bayreuth, but unfortunately passed away. I think it was last year. Um, so it is now 1:12. Everybody who's probably going to sign in has probably signed in. So I'd like to start and introduce our speaker. We are honored to have Paul Schofield, a Wagnerian scholar for more than 40 years. He is a writer and musician, as well as a former Zen Buddhist monk. He has been a contributor to and editor of our scholarly journal Leitmotive, as well as a former board member of the Wagner Society of Northern California. His book, The Redeemer Reborn, combines his extensive research into Wagner's life and works with his own insights developed from 9 years in Buddhist monastic training. He has lectured in cities across the US to opera, Buddhist, and university audiences and resides in Crescent City, California. So we are honored to have you here, Paul, and I turn the floor over to you. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And it's been quite a while since I talked to the Northern Cal group, and some of you have heard me talk about this subject before, but Andy tells me that there are a lot of new faces since I last talked to all of you, so you'll be hearing this for the first time, perhaps. For those of you who are hearing it again, this will be a good chance to kind of brush up on it again because you're going to be seeing Parsifal in a few weeks. And today I'm going to talk about the idea put forth in my book, The Redeemer Reborn, Parsifal as the fifth opera of Wagner's Ring. And to me, the idea of Parsifal being the fifth opera of the Ring is not theoretical. It is literal in the sense that I personally envision an actual performance of a 5-opera cycle. And this concept is based in part on the idea that the 4 main characters of the Ring are reborn into the opera Parsifal, there to achieve the redemption that is not attained at the end of the Ring. Alberich is reborn as Klingsor, Wotan is reborn as Alberich, Brunhilde is reborn as Kundry, and of course Siegfried is reborn as Parsifal. And part of my concept in performing such a 5-opera cycle is that the audience will see these reincarnations not only in theory, but in actuality by having the singers who perform the 4 Ring characters also perform the 4 characters in Parsifal. The costumes will be different, but the faces will be the same, thus representing in performance an important teaching of Buddhism that when a person is reborn in a new life, that person is not completely the same as the old person, but not completely different either. The new person has inherited karma from the previous person, and that is the connection. And the book came out in 2008, and I sent a copy up to Spate Jenkins, who was the director up in Seattle. And he read the book and he liked it, and he very nicely arranged a meeting with me when I was up there to talk about the logistics of actually performing a 5-opera cycle. And he said that such a performance could be done. It could be done financially. He said the singers could do it, but he said you would need 2 things. You would need the warehouse space close to your opera house for the sets for 5 operas, not just 4, and you would need 2 orchestras. He said that he could not ask his string players to do Parsifal right after the ring 3 times. He said that even after 3 rings, some of his string players have to be treated for carpal tunnel syndrome. So what he's saying is that in terms of the warehouse space and the 2 orchestras, in America, we would be talking about the Met because they have both. And in Europe, we would be talking about Bayreuth. But it was very encouraging that Spate said it couldn't be done, just not in Seattle. Now, when I began writing the book, I gave myself one rule that I could not violate. Every idea I had in terms of my interpretation and explanation had to have its root in Wagner himself. That is, I could not make something up by myself and impose it on what Wagner had written. There had to be evidence in Wagner, whether librettos, letters to friends, or his published articles. And for example, when I connect the Rheingold to the Holy Grail, which I'm going to do, that connection has to come from Wagner himself. I could not just make that up. And when I say that Grail symbols exist in the ring, which they do, that has to be there in the libretto itself, which I'm going to show, but I can't just make something like that up. When I talk about characters from one opera being reborn as characters in another opera for the purpose of spiritual advancement and eventual redemption, that has to come from Wagner. And I'm going to show how that goes on. What we need to remember here is that Wagner first read Wolfram von Eschenbach's great epic poem Parsifal in 1845, and Wagner performed his own Parsifal in 1882. And this means that during a 37-year period, Wagner was thinking about the stories of Parsifal, Lohengrin, Tristan and Isolde, Siegfried, Wotan, Brunhilde, all at the same time. And all these ideas were percolating in his creative imagination all at the same time together, not separately. And starting in 1855, after reading Schopenhauer, Wagner began reading as many books on Buddhism as he could find in European translations. And in 1856, he wrote a sketch for an opera about the Buddha himself titled Die Sieger, the victors, and those who were victorious in their quest for enlightenment. And therefore, connecting the story of the ring and the story of Parsifal together into one integrated whole through the Buddhist teaching of karma and rebirth is not out of keeping in Wagner's own ideas. It's actually, I believe, in keeping with at least many of Wagner's own ideas. And that is what we're going to be talking about today. And very quickly, I can show a musical connection between the ring and Parsifal because many people ask me, how does this idea be reflected in the music? Götterdämmerung ends in the key of D flat. And the final chord that we hear is a D flat major triad chord. Thus, the top note of that D flat chord is A flat. Parsifal begins and ends in the key of A flat. And the note on which Parsifal begins is A flat. So therefore, we can say musically that Parsifal begins where the ring leaves off. So there's one thing I want to mention about Parsifal specifically because it's very important, and then we'll go into how Parsifal is joined to the ring. Wagner called the ring a Bühnenfestspiel, a stage festival play, and Parsifal he called a Bühnenweihfestspiel, or stage consecration festival play. Wagner fully intended to have Parsifal serve a religious purpose in his time, just as the passions of Bach and the ancient tragedies of the Greeks did in their times. But it is very important to understand what Wagner meant by religion. He was not interested in the doctrinal or dogmatic level of any religion, and he was not trying to convert anyone to any kind of outward religion. In his mind, the artists of his time were the new priests, as he believed that the Christianity of his time had failed, and that organized institutional religion had actually obscured the true spirit of the teachings rather than having illuminated them. Thus, in his mind, it was up to artists to communicate through artistic and religious symbol the true nature of the teachings, and in this light, Wagner uses symbols from various religions to represent what he sees as the path to redemption and salvation. He freely uses Christian, Buddhist, Hindu, pagan, and mystery religion symbols in Parsifal. And here is what he writes in Religion and Art, because this sums up Wagner's own idea of what I'm going to be talking about. One could say that at the point where religion becomes artificial, it is for art to preserve the essence of religion by grasping the symbolic value of its mythic symbols, which the former would have us believe in a literal sense, so that the deep hidden truth in them might be revealed by their ideal representation. And Barry Milliton says of this passage, the value of religion, therefore, was to be found not in a fundamental acceptance of its tenets, but in a presentation in symbolic form of its universal spiritual truths. And this is what Wagner is doing in Parsifal. Through the use of religious and spiritual symbols drawn from a variety of world traditions, he is illuminating the path to enlightenment and salvation as he understands it. And in keeping with this idea, when I explain the Buddhist teaching of karma and rebirth, as well as various other teachings from Hinduism, Christianity, and mystery ceremonies, I am not trying to advance any particular religious tradition. I am explaining what Wagner is doing with the Ring and Parsifal in one work. So if we are going to see a 5-opera cycle performed in the way that I have described, then the story that ends in the final act of Parsifal must begin at the start of the Ring. And this is exactly what we find. In all the classic Grail stories, there are 4 main symbols that are an integral part of the legend. These are the Grail, a wounded fisher king who is the Grail guardian, the wasteland, representing both an agricultural disaster and a spiritual disaster, and a dolorous stroke, a blow with either a spear or a sword that wounds the Grail king, giving him the wound that will not heal and which plunges his lands into waste. Healing the wound of the Grail king and bringing his lands back to life and performing the ceremony of the Grail all represent final enlightenment and salvation for both the Redeemer himself and the world. This means that if we are going to join Parsifal to the Ring, all of these main symbols must be present in the Ring as well as in Parsifal, and indeed they are. The events of the story that becomes the Ring actually begins before the curtain rises in Scene 1 of Das Rheingold. We know from the first Norn in the prelude to Götterdämmerung that the story begins with Wotan breaking a branch off the World Ash-tree and fashioning that branch into a spear of power. And this is what she says. At the World Ash-tree once I wove, where fair and green there grew from its branches verdant and shady leaves. Those cooling shadows sheltered a spring, wisdom's voice I heard in its waves. I sang my holy song. A valiant god came to drink at the spring, and the price he had to pay was the loss of an eye. From the World Ash-tree mighty Wotan broke a branch, and his spear was shaped from that branch he tore from the tree. As year succeeded year, the wound slowly weakened the tree, dry, leafless, and barren. Death seized on the tree, whispering waters then failed in the spring. Grief and sorrow stole through my song. So prior to Wotan's appearance, the World Ash-tree bloomed fair and green, and the spring of wisdom ran with water. Wotan's act of breaking the branch, here equivalent to the dolorous stroke, has caused the tree to become leafless and barren, the spring to dry up. Wagner even refers to the wound slowly weakening the tree, and we see that the dolorous stroke has caused the world to become a wasteland, just as it does in the traditional Grail legends. We also see Grail symbolism in Wagner's original idea of Siegfried's Tod, Siegfried's death, back in 1848. Brunhilde has redeemed the gods through his death. The ring has returned to the Rhine. Siegfried is carried to Valhalla by Brunhilde, and the enslaved Nibelungs are freed, and Wotan is appointed supreme ruler of the gods and of the world. And Brunhilde sings in the last passage, "Hear then, ye mighty gods, your wrongdoing is annulled. Thank him, the hero, who took your guilt upon him. Only one shall rule, All-Father, glorious one. Rejoice in the freest of heroes. Siegfried, I bring to thee, give him greeting sweet, the warrant of endless might." The chorus then adds, "Wotan, Wotan, ruler of gods, bless thou the flames, burn hero and bride, burn too the faithful horse, so that, wound healed and pure, all fathers' free consorts may gladly greet Valhalla, joined in endless bliss." So here we see the Grail symbolism of wound healing representing the final salvation right in Wagner's original scheme of what was to become the four-opera cycle of the Ring. So what is the second Dolores stroke we have in the Ring? Alberich, rebuffed by the Rhine maiden, steals the gold of the Rhine and fashions this gold into a ring of power. Spear and Grail have separated right at the start of the Ring. And at this point, you can all very rightfully ask, what is the basis for equating the Rheingold with the Holy Grail? Wagner completed Lohengrin in April of 1848. He then wrote an essay called The Nibelungen Myth as Sketch for a Drama, from which he fashioned the original libretto of Siegfried's Tod. He then wrote a long essay, The Nibelungs, World History as Told Through Myth. There isn't time to explain this whole essay, as that would be a whole lecture in itself, but in this essay of about 13,000 words, Wagner specifically joins the Rheingold to the Holy Grail. We can talk more about this essay during the second part, that is the question and answer period if you want. But it is enough to know right now that in this essay of February 1849, Wagner explains his idea of the original Nibelungen myth, and in his explanation, the hoard, which includes the gold, jewels, a magic cloak, and a great sword named Balmung, becomes associated with the desire for wealth and power in the world. In what Wagner called the ascent of the ideal content of the hoard into the Holy Grail, the desire for worldly wealth and power becomes transformed into the desire for spiritual quest. And the Grail becomes what Wagner calls the ideal representative of the Nibelungen hoard. This transformation of consciousness from the striving for worldly wealth and power being transformed into the quest of the Holy Grail is exactly what we see in the transition from the Ring to Parsifal. The characters of the Ring are all, in their own ways, striving for wealth, power, and romantic love. In Parsifal, these reborn characters are in the quest of the Holy Grail. I will talk more about this as we go along, but I want to read to you a quotation from Robert Gutmann that shows the connection that we are talking about. In 1962, Gutmann wrote an introduction to William Morris's translation of the Volsunga saga. And speaking of the Nibelungen essay, Gutmann writes, "The Nibelungs identifies Friedrich Barbarossa as the reborn sun god Siegfried. The Nibelungen horde mysteriously ascends, is transmuted in the process of time into the Holy Grail, and becomes the object of the Emperor's last journey to the East. Despite the turgid prose, a reader with knowledge of the completed cycle of Wagner's masterworks is thrilled to perceive in this essay what the struggling young genius could himself only dimly apprehend, the unparalleled path that lay before him from Rheingold to Parsifal, a road that was to lead from the theft of the treasure in the river's depths to the reunion of Spear and Grail in the temple of Monsalvat." So here we have Wagner himself separating Spear and Grail right at the start of the Ring, and we see Robert Gutmann himself perceiving, as many people have done over the years, the connection between the Ring and Parsifal. So before we begin talking about the actual reincarnations of the four main characters of the ring into the four main characters of Parsifal, I want to mention one more aspect of the separation of Spear and Grail coming at the start of the ring. The ring in Parsifal as one 5-opera cycle constitutes a grand example in symbolic terms of the whole panorama of human existence, from the original fall to final enlightenment and salvation. If we go back to the first Norn, we see the World Ash-tree, the tree of life, with the Norns weaving the rope of fate. And we can use our imaginations to see also the Rhine maidens peacefully swimming in the Rhine, and of course the Earth Mother Erda asleep and dreaming the world. We can see a version of the Garden of Eden before the fall. Into this world of women and original innocence comes a male sky god bent on conquest and power. He commits an act of violence against nature and uses this act to give himself power over the world. Through this act of violence and greed, along with Alberich's similar act of stealing the gold, the original Garden of Eden is spoiled, defiled, if you will, and the world falls into a cycle of fear, greed, hate, violence, despair, and eventual destruction. The world is in need of a savior, a great hero who will redeem the world from its present state of chaos and who will restore the world both spiritually and naturally into its original pure state. In the context of Buddhism, this great hero savior was the Buddha Shakyamuni. In Christianity, this hero savior was Christ. In Wagner, this hero's redeemer is Siegfried, reborn as Parsifal. So we now come to the actual rebirths of Alberich, Wotan, Brunhilde, and Siegfried into Klingsor, Amfortas, Kundry, and Parsifal. And Wagner himself believed very seriously in what most people call reincarnation and what Buddhism terms karma and rebirth. Wagner had written a letter to Cosima in which he said, "Only music can convey the mysteries of reincarnation." And in a letter to Matilda Wesendonck, dated August 1860, Wagner wrote, "Only a profound acceptance of the doctrine of metempsychosis or reincarnation is his word, has been able to console me by revealing the point at which all things finally converge at the same level of redemption, after the various individual existences which run alongside each other in time have come together in a meaningful way outside of time. According to the beautiful Buddhist doctrine, the spotless purity of Lohengrin is easily explicable in terms of his being the continuation of Parsifal, who was the first to strive towards purity. Elsa, similarly, would reach the level of Lohengrin through being reborn. Thus, my plan for the victors struck me as being the concluding section of Lohengrin. Here, Savitri, Elsa, entirely reaches the level of Ananda. In this way, all the terrible tragedy of life would be attributable to our dislocation in time and space. But since time and space are merely our way of perceiving things, but otherwise have no reality, even the greatest tragic pain must be explicable to those who are truly clear-sighted as no more than an individual error. I believe it is so, and in all truth, it is a question simply of what is pure and noble, something which in itself is painless. And Wagner is referring here to the sketch that I mentioned before, made in 1856 for the Buddha, the Victors. And in this sketch, a low-caste maiden named Prakriti had fallen in love with the Buddha's attendant Ananda. And since Ananda was a celibate monk, there was no chance for marriage with Prakriti. The Buddha offers a spiritual marriage to Prakriti by ordaining her as a bhikkhuni, a female monk, and the order of female monks is founded. By the time of this letter, Wagner had renamed Prakriti Savitri. We can talk more about this sketch later if you would all like during the questions and answers. But in this letter, Wagner is seeing Lohengrin as the continuation of Parsifal, his father, and he is specifically seeing Savitri as a reincarnation of Elsa. Wagner here is thinking spiritually. He's not worrying about the character of the Middle Ages being reborn in 500 BC. What is important now is that in this letter to Matilda, Wagner is talking about characters from one opera being reincarnated as characters in another opera for the purpose of spiritual progress and eventual enlightenment. Excuse me. So now we are ready to look at the specifics of the rebirths that we have been talking about. And I'm going to be talking about karma here, and I'll be using the terminology that Buddhism uses, and that is converting and cleansing karma. What Wagner uses in Parsifal to express a similar idea is expiating a sin. When Gurnemanz is talking to the squires in Act 1 of Parsifal, he talks to them about Kundry, and he says, she lives here now, perhaps reincarnated, to expiate some sin from an earlier life not yet forgiven there. So if you want to see the idea of expiating a sin being parallel to converting and cleansing karma, that's fine. And karma is not sin because karma has both positive karma and negative karma. But the idea of atoning for sin can be seen as parallel to the idea of converting and cleansing karma. The law of, excuse me, let me take a quick break. The law of karma in both Buddhism and Hinduism is the law in the universe that governs the consequence of action. All volitional actions create karma, both, excuse me, both positive and negative. Yeah, I have a hoarse voice, just a minute here. How we treat other people and beings in general will create either positive or negative karma. According to the Buddhist teaching of karma and rebirth, there is no inherently individual, unchanging entity or soul that simply transmigrates from one life to the next, maintaining its individual identity from one existence to another. This is what Buddhism terms anatta, or no separate soul. Rather, the uncleansed reproductive karma left over at the end of one life will condition rebirth in another life, in whatever form and circumstance offer the best opportunity for the cleansing of that karma. What continues from one life to the next is not an individual personality, but rather what the famous Buddhist monk Narada called a continuity of a particular life flux. Among the aspects of this life flux can be particular karmic tendencies, habitual patterns of behavior, which can continue from one life to the next until the karma associated with them is fully converted and cleansed. And Narada has summed it up this way. As long as one is bound up by craving or attachment, one accumulates fresh karmic activities which must materialize in one form or another in the eternal cycle of birth and death. When all forms of craving are eradicated, reproductive karmic forces cease to operate, and one attains nirvana, escaping the cycle of birth and death. The idea of reproductive karma is karma that needs rebirth in order to be taken care of. And the word nirvana, literally translated, means no craving, no desire. So when all forms of craving are eradicated, reproductive karma forces cease to operate, and one attains nirvana, escaping the cycle of birth and death. When karma creates rebirth in human form, the new person is not completely the same as the previous person, nor is the new person completely different. That's what I mentioned at the beginning. The new person has inherited karma from the previous person, but it's very important to realize that the new person is not the same as the old one in all aspects. This is particularly true if a good deal of merit or positive karma was gained in the previous life. The new person will also inherit the merit, not just the uncleansed negative karma. The new person has the opportunity to correct the errors of the past, thus cleansing the old karma. If this is not done, the new person runs the risk of falling back into the old tendencies and habits, thus perpetuating and compounding the old karma rather than cleansing it. With this in mind, we can look now at the rebirths of the characters we have been talking about, beginning with Alberich being reborn as Klingzor. At the start of Das Rheingold, Alberich lusts for the Rhine maidens and is spurned by them. Frustrated in his pursuit of sexual satisfaction, he learns that if he renounces love, he can acquire the gold of the Rhine, which will give him power over the world. His desire for sex then turns into desire for wealth and power, and he forswears love in return for the Rheingold. And Alberich, like all the characters of the Ring, gains insight and wisdom in the course of the events of the Ring and in the final conflagration. In Parsifal, then, he is reborn as Klingzor. Klingzor has enough spiritual inclination to ask for admittance into the Order of the Grail. Celibacy is a requirement for entrance into the Brotherhood, and Klingzor makes an honest effort to become a Grail Knight, but he is unable to overcome his sexual desire, and thus he fails in his attempt. He retires from Monsalvat to a valley where he tries to overcome this desire and attachment, but he is unable to do so. He then castrates himself, hoping that this will gain him entrance into the order. But Titurel, at that time the Grail King, scorns Klingzor and his hideous act and refuses to admit him. Klingzor is furious with rage at the refusal and vows to capture the Grail by force. He uses his castration to gain magic arts, and with these arts he creates a castle and pleasure garden where he ensnares the Knights of the Grail through the very temptation he himself was unable to overcome, lust. We have a mirror of Alberich. Alberich too had been rebuffed and in return renounced love for power and wealth. Klingzor is rebuffed and his self-castration is another form of renouncing love. Attempting to capture the ring through the use of magic power mirrors Alberich's attempt to gain power over the world through the Rheingold. Klingzor has made a genuine attempt to convert his karma, but through weakness and anger he gives up too soon, reverting back to the actions of his previous life and thus compounding the error rather than converting and cleansing it. Klingzor will have to be reborn again, achieving in some future life the emancipation the others attain at the end of Parsifal. But the Buddha had said that eventually everyone will have our karma converted and cleansed, which means eventually we will all attain enlightenment. And thus Klingzor is not abandoned. Klingzor will, in a future life, be able to attain enlightenment too. So now we come to Wotan Amfortas. Wotan's spiritual problem is ambition fired by hubris, excessive pride that leads to error in judgment and error in action. Wotan is king of the gods, and he attempts to rule the world with order and justice, at least as far as he can conceive of them. He breaks a branch off the World Ash-tree and fashions a spear of power. Into the shaft of this spear he carves the laws by which he will rule, showing on one hand that he really does want to rule justly and not as a tyrant, but because his actions remain controlled by ambition and hubris, he becomes an unwilling mirror to Alberich. Wotan, too, renounces love in his way, seeking in its stead power over the world. As he says to Brunhilde in Act 2 of Die Valkyrie, "When youth's delightful pleasures had waned, I longed in my heart for power, and driven by impetuous desires, I won myself the world." In the course of the events of the Ring, Wotan perceives the error of all he has done, and by renouncing any further attempt at recapturing the ring, he performs his first act of contrition. The merit of this contrition allows him to be reborn as Amfortas, who has a chance to dedicate his life to spiritual quest. Amfortas inherits the karmic tendency of ambition and hubris, which was not entirely converted at the end of the Ring, because Wotan's renunciation alone was not enough to cleanse all of the karma of his actions. More positive action is needed in order to cleanse that karma completely. And thus the reproductive karma left over at Wotan's death conditions the rebirth in the person of Amfortas. The spear of Amfortas is not only the spear of Longinus, the Roman centurion who pierced Jesus' side while he hung on the cross, and this was the interpretation that Wagner adopted as his own, but it is also the spear of Wotan, a spear that had been misused for power. Amfortas, as Grail Guardian, is given the opportunity to use the spear for selfless action in the service of the Grail, and in doing so to cleanse the old karma completely. However, albeit with best of intentions, he uses the spear for personal ambition, trying to conquer Klingzor in knightly combat out of pride and a desire for glory. As Gurnemanz tells the squires in Act 1, all too daring Amfortas, thus armed, who could have prevented you from vanquishing the sorcerer? And this is the reason he loses the spear and suffers the horrid wound that cannot be healed until the coming of the Redeemer. Like Klingzor, who had reverted to a karmic tendency inherited from Alberich, Amfortas unwittingly reverts to a karmic tendency inherited from Wotan, mirroring Klingzor just as Wotan had mirrored Alberich. Amfortas's wound is the wound of compounded karma, and the terrible suffering he bears for so long is now what is needed to cleanse the karma first set in motion by Wotan in the ring. With the return of Parsifal to Monsalvat, that period of suffering is over and Amfortas is ready for redemption. So now we come to Brunhilde Kundry. The rebirth of the rebirth of Brunhilde into Kundry is more complex than the rebirths of the others, for there was a dual nature to Brunhilde, which is reflected in the dual nature of Kundry. The spiritual problem that Kundry inherits from Brunhilde is one of pride, anger, a deep sense of personal hurt, and a fierce, even warlike desire for revenge. All these traits flared up in Brunhilde during the events of the Ring, particularly in Götterdämmerung. And although it is true that Brunhilde's final forgiveness and self-sacrifice greatly soften these traits, they are not completely expunged, and enough traces still remain for Kundry to inherit. And Wagner himself gave Kundry past lives. As Klingzor calls Kundry from sleep in Act 2 of Parsifal, he says, come up to me. Your master calls you, nameless one, primeval witch, rose of hell. You were Herodias, and what else? Gundrigia there, Kundry here. According to an entry in Cosima's diary of March 14, 1877, Wagner briefly considered giving Kundry the name Gundrigia. At lunch, he tells me, she will be called Gundrigia, the weaver of war. But then he decides to keep Kundry. Although no Valkyrie in any of the sources used by Wagner is named Gundrigia, Gun, strife or battle, is one of Odin's principal Valkyries. And of course, when Kundry makes her first entrance in Act 1 of Parsifal, she is called by the squires the Wild Rider, flying on her horse, who must be bringing tidings from far-off lands. And the image we have in our minds is of a Valkyrie. And very quickly, I can mention something about the name Gundrigia. Brunhilde means ready for battle, and Gundrigia means either the weaver of war or weaver of battle or weaver of strife, etc. In essence, Gundrigia is another name for Brunhilde. So this means that Wagner is, again, as we've seen before, making a direct connection not only between the Ring and Parsifal, but here he's directly making a connection from Brunhilde to Kundry. So the dual nature of Kundry, that she serves both the Grail Brotherhood and their enemy Klingzor, stems from the karmic debt she inherited from Brunhilde. Brunhilde began her life serving Wotan as one of his Valkyrie daughters, and indeed, she even considers herself to be Wotan's will. Thus, she has an obvious karmic connection to Wotan. And after her rebellion, Wotan kisses away her godhead and makes her mortal. She is awakened on the rock by Siegfried, and the two briefly share an idyll. When she is betrayed by Siegfried, she plots revenge, and it is she who tells Hagen, son of Alberich, where Siegfried is vulnerable. Hagen, armed with this knowledge, then kills Siegfried. This is Brunhilde's karmic debt, for she directly participates in Siegfried's death. Before Brunhilde performs the final immolation, she communes with the Rhine maidens and learns the truth about Siegfried's betrayal. She does forgive him, and with her own self-sacrifice, she performs much of the contrition necessary in order to turn her karmic stream in the direction of salvation. But the final debt of Siegfried's death must still be redeemed, and thus she takes what will be her final incarnation before enlightenment as Kundry. And just as Brunhilde served both Wotan and Alberich through Hagen, so Kundry serves both the Knights of the Grail and Klingsor. Brunhilde was intrinsically good and would not have served Alberich and Hagen had she not felt so betrayed by Siegfried. Thus Kundry instinctively serves the Grail and serves Klingsor involuntarily only when summoned by his magic. That his magic can work on her is due to the karmic bond that Brunhilde formed by plotting with Hagen. And this bond is severed in Act 2 of Parsifal. So now we come to Siegfried Parsifal. Siegfried's karmic tendencies are naive pride and greed, along with an inability to feel compassion for others. Siegfried is intrinsically good and even noble, but he is also naive to a fault, selfish, prideful, and at times arrogant. His inability to feel compassion for the suffering of others precludes him from being able to accomplish the work of redemption. And Siegfried considers the world to be there for his taking. Anything he wants, he takes, and there is no one who can stop him. He never even considers that there might be something wrong with this. Only when he is dying, with a spear wound in his back, that he begins to see the world in its true light. Only then does wisdom begin to dawn on him. He sees Brunhilde in her true light as Heilige Braut, holy bride, not as something to take when he wants, trade when he wants, and forget about when it suits him. He never did those things out of evil, only out of ignorance. In his dying moments, this veil of illusion begins to lift. And it is too late for him to come to full wisdom in this particular lifetime, but the fact that the veil lifts even partially is enough for him to be reborn as Parsifal. And when we first see Parsifal, he seems to be Siegfried exactly. He is young, strong, full of aggressive energy, and just like Siegfried, he bounds into the world, considering it there for his taking. He is prodigious with arms, and has made creatures and people fear him. He is ignorant of worldly ways, having grown up in the wilds away from men and society. And also, like Siegfried, his father died in battle before he was born, and he has a strong yearning for his mother. But Parsifal is not the young Siegfried, for he has inherited the wisdom of Siegfried's final vision. Thus there is a seed in Parsifal that was not there in Siegfried as a youth. As Siegfried lies dying, the orchestra plays Brunhilde's awakening music, and Siegfried sings, "Brunhilde, holiest bride, now wake from your slumber." The orchestra recalls Brunhilde's awakening on the rock from the third act of Siegfried, but this music is not just remembrance of a former event. It now becomes symbolic of Siegfried's spiritual awakening, commenting on the action just as the chorus would have done in ancient Greek tragedy. This spiritual awakening is now just under the surface in Parsifal, needing only a catalyst to bloom and flower in this lifetime. That catalyst is Gurnemantz's admonishment at the killing of the swan. For the first time in the life flux of Siegfried Parsifal, true compassion for the suffering of others is awakened. Although Siegfried had felt a kind of sympathy for and kinship with the animals of the forest, he had never felt genuine contrition for any of his acts that had caused suffering to others. It is this vital contrition that Parsifal feels for killing the swan. And with this, he takes his first step toward becoming the true Redeemer. So now that we have finished the basics of the rebirths of the ring into Parsifal, we can look at the final redemption that takes place, completing the final paths to enlightenment and salvation for Wotan, Amfortas, Brunhilde Kundra, and Siegfried Parsifal. And the shooting of the swan comes from a story of the Buddha when he was still a prince, Prince Siddhartha. And one day, Prince Siddhartha was walking in the forest near his father's palace, and he came upon a swan wounded with an arrow. And Prince Siddhartha withdrew the arrow and nursed the swan. And a short time later, a group of his cousins who had been hunting came into the clearing, and one of them said, "I claim this swan because I shot it." And Prince Siddhartha said, "I claim this swan because I saved its life." And the white swan also has a Hindu reference. In Hinduism, the white swan is known as the sacred Hansa. And the sacred Hansa is the mount of Brahma, the creator. And the image of Brahma, the creator, riding on a white swan symbolizes the spiritual ability to distinguish between what is real and what is unreal. And this will become extremely important in Act 2 of Parsifal, when Parsifal is confronted with the temptation of Kundry. He's going to have to really understand what is real and what is not real. And I have a short article in the program booklet that you'll see when you go to the performances of Parsifal. And the opera very nicely found an actual painting from Asia of Brahma riding on a white swan. And I mentioned this in the article, so you'll be able to see the picture of Brahma riding a white swan right next to the article. So there's a Hindu reference here, not just a Buddhist one. And Wagner knew about all of this, by the way, which was, one of the incredible things for someone who was living in the 19th century. Wagner really understood these things, and he put these things intentionally into the opera Parsifal. So now that we have, excuse me. So now we're ready for Act 1 of Parsifal. The knights and squire in Act 1, the knights and squires see a swan fall from the sky, shot with an arrow, and they are horrified, as no killing is allowed in the land of Monsalvat. This is the sacred land, and all creatures are sacred and protected. When Parsifal appears, he is accused of killing the swan, and he boasts. He says, "Yes, I can hit anything that flies." But after Gundamance has explained to him the grave error of his actions, Parsifal is truly contrite, and he breaks his bow into pieces and flings away his arrows. And this is a very important moment in action, for the breaking of his bow is the direct opposite of his famous deed in the ring, where as Siegfried he had reforged the broken sword Notum. So this is very, very important. Again, Wagner does this intentionally. And here Parsifal is taking his first step toward renouncing violence. He will never again carry a weapon of his own making into the world for conquest and glory. And Parsifal then witnesses the Grail ceremony, and Gundamance thinks maybe, just perhaps, this young miscreant may be the innocent fool prophesied by the writing on the Grail, the innocent fool enlightened through compassion who will heal the wound of the Grail king, Amfortas. When the ceremony is over, Gundamance asks Parsifal if he understands what he has seen, and Parsifal, greatly moved, cannot answer. Gundamance then throws him out, and Parsifal begins his wandering that will take him to the castle of Klingzor. And now we come to Act 2 of Parsifal. And over the many years that I've been talking, even with people who know Wagner very well, they say, "What the heck is happening in Act 2?" And a few years ago, quite a few years ago, I read a review of Lucy Beckett's book on Parsifal, and the reviewer, having completed the book, said, "I still don't know what's happening in Parsifal." And so what I'm going to do here is talk very specifically about exactly what is happening in Parsifal. Two main things are going on here. And that doesn't mean these are the only two things. This means that the two main things that I'm going to talk about. Number one, this is in symbolic form the enlightenment of the Buddha, the attack of Mara's army and his weathering of that attack and his realization of final enlightenment. So we'll talk about the Buddha first, and I'll talk about the second one. The story of the Buddha's enlightenment, which is portrayed often in Buddhist art, is that the Buddha, after 6 years of extreme ascetic practice, had still not attained enlightenment, and he realized that extreme asceticism was not the way. He then vowed to give up the extreme practices and find the middle way. The middle way in Buddhism is not only the middle way between the two extremes, it's also spiritually the third position beyond the opposites. And we'll get to that at the end of the opera. That will become important when we get to the end. So the Buddha sat down beneath what came to be known as the Bodhi tree, the tree of enlightenment, and he vowed not to rise until he had experienced full redemption, full enlightenment. A young woman from a nearby village saw him meditating beneath this tree and, mistaking him for a tree spirit, offered him a bowl of rice, milk, and honey. And she had been planning to offer this to the spirits of the forest, but she saw the Buddha and she thought, here's the spirit of the forest, I'll give it to him. The Buddha accepted the offering, and with the strength that this food gave him, he redoubled his efforts to realize full enlightenment and salvation. And as he neared enlightenment, Mara, the tempter in Buddhism, tried to keep him from enlightenment with everything that Mara could muster. And Mara in Buddhism is not Satan in every Christian respect, but rather Mara represents that aspect of ourselves that shows us all the choices, tempting us to choose the path of desire fulfillment as opposed to the path of spiritual training. And my master, Jigyu Kennett Roshi, used to tell the monks, Mara is our greatest ally in training, for he shows us where we're weak. That's actually a very profound idea, because some people say, Satan, oh my God, and they run for the hills. But Mara is actually a friend if you understand the idea of temptation. And this is what Parsifal is going to achieve. So Mara tried to tempt the Buddha with women. That was the first temptation, but that didn't work. Mara then asked the Buddha, who are you to be doing this? The Buddha simply touched the ground with his right hand, signifying, the earth is my witness that this is to be so. Then Mara called out his whole army to attack the Buddha with spears, swords, arrows, and all manner of other weapons. But the Buddha had reached the point in his meditation where he saw that this seeming army of devils and demons was in truth nothing but a manifestation of his own desires and delusions, and that in itself this army had no substance, and thus the Buddha did not resist. And because he did not resist, the army had no power over him, and all the weapons launched at the Buddha simply turned into flowers that fell at his feet. The army gradually disappeared, and when the Buddha, who had been meditating the whole night, saw the morning star, he was enlightened. Now we can see here that Act 2 of Parsifal describes this exactly, at least in Wagner's symbolic operatic form. And this is what I'm going to explain. When Parsifal arrives at Klingsor's castle, the knights of the castle try to stop him, but he disarms, remember, he doesn't have a weapon because he's broken his bow and arrows. He disarms Sir Ferris and wounds the knights, not enough to kill them, but enough to keep himself from harm. Thus he resists the first temptation, the temptation to kill for glory and reputation. The flower maidens then appear, and they represent the temptation of women. Even though Parsifal plays with them in a similar way to Siegfried's playing with the Rhine maidens in Götterdämmerung. In fact, the scene is very similar in some ways. They cannot really tempt him. That is, the Rhine maidens, the flower maidens cannot really tempt him in any serious way. Kundry then appears, calling the name Parsifal. And here the temptation becomes deeper, for the temptation now attacks Parsifal where he is weakest, his yearning for his mother. Kundry offers herself in place of Parsifal's mother, Herzalida, tempting Parsifal to seek salvation in human, thus physical and karmic love, rather than in divine love represented by the Grail. When Kundry gives him the kiss, Parsifal awakens to the true nature and source of all suffering, and he understands what he did not understand when he first witnessed the Grail ceremony. He feels the wound of Amfortas on his own body, and then he does what the Buddha did under the Bodhi tree, again, in Wagner's symbolic form. Just as the Buddha remained steadfast in meditation, so Parsifal fixes his gaze unmovingly on the Grail. Parsifal feels the pangs of all the karmic forces that are now assailing him, but his gaze remains fixed on what he calls the sacred vessel. Kundry now calls for Klingzor to destroy Parsifal, and Klingzor appears on the rampart with the spear. This is both the spear that smote Jesus on the cross and the spear of Wotan. It also symbolically represents all the weapons that were hurled at the Buddha by Mara's army. Klingzor hurls the spear, but it stops above Parsifal's head, just as the weapons hurled at the Buddha turned into flowers that fell at his feet. Parsifal takes the spear in his hand and makes the sign of the cross. With this sign I rout your enchantment. As the spear closes the wound which you dealt him with it, may it crush your lying splendor into mourning and ruin. This is Parsifal's enlightenment. The destruction of Klingzor's castle and magic garden symbolizes the final piercing of the cloud of delusion. The mist of Maya has been dispersed completely. The mirage created by karmic desire and attachment has been penetrated, leaving, as Wagner's stage directions say, only withered flowers strewn on the ground. These are the flowers that fell at the feet of the Buddha. Kundry falls back to the ground with a scream, and Parsifal pauses at the top of the ruined wall. He turns back to Kundry and he says, "You know where you can find me again." Now, along with all of that, not instead of, but along with all of that, we can also see that Act 2 represents, again in symbolic form, a reenacting of the scene of Götterdämmerung, where Siegfried, disguised as Gunther, steals the ring from Brunhilde's finger. This is another way to see the reincarnations of both Siegfried and Brunhilde into the opera Parsifal. What we are seeing is the way in which the karma that was not fully cleansed in the ring becomes cleansed in the opera Parsifal. One point of reference we can use to see Act 2 in this way is a statement Wagner made to Cosima on June 4, 1878. Cosima records R, which of course is Richard, sees a semblance between Wotan and Kundry. Both long for salvation and both rebel against it. Kundry in the scene with Parsifal, Wotan with Siegfried. And this is another way that Wagner himself is seeing a connection between the ring and Parsifal. He's seeing that what happens with Wotan in the opera Siegfried when he confronts Siegfried is happening with Kundry when she confronts, if you will, Parsifal, who has to resist her temptation. And what we're seeing here is that this is exactly how many people behave. That is, what Wagner says, Kundry in the scene with Parsifal and Wotan with Siegfried, both long for salvation and both rebel against it. And this is what we all do so much of the time. We long for salvation, but at the same time are afraid to let go of the karmic attachments that hinder that salvation. But let go we must. This is the predicament of Kundry. When she is faced with Parsifal after the kiss doesn't work. Kundry recognizes in Parsifal the quality of the Redeemer, but the true nature of redemption, the dissolution of the separate self into the eternal, terrifies her, for she is not yet ready to give up everything. Because she is still in the grip of Klingzor's power, that is the delusion of Maya, the delusion of a separate self, she is unwilling to give to Parsifal what he is asking for, letting go of everything. Wotan, faced with the potential Redeemer Siegfried, was unable to let go of self and ended up trying to fight Siegfried, and only Wotan's physical defeat made him retreat. The same occurs with Kundry. Because she cannot voluntarily give up her attachment to the old karma, it must be rent from her. This is on a transformed level, a reenactment of the scene on the rock in Götterdämmerung, where Siegfried, disguised by the Tarnhelm as Gunther, tore the ring from Brunhilde's finger. The disguise of the Tarnhelm represents Siegfried's entanglement in the delusion of the greed and corruption of the world, his own true self hidden behind the veil of Maya, delusion. In this guise, he forcibly takes from Brunhilde the ring, a token of her love for the true Siegfried. Because she had not been willing to give up the ring to the Rhine maidens in the scene with Valtrauta, it has to be torn from her. Now Parsifal, having shed the Tarnhelm of delusion, is appearing before Kundry in his true guise, that of Redeemer. He is asking for the ring, that is all karmic attachment. But because she will not let go by herself, it has to be taken from her by force. This is terribly painful, but it is the only way that Parsifal can help her. And Parsifal continues to reject her pleas for sexual union, and finally he tells her the truth that she has been unable to understand. Forevermore would you be damned with me, if for 1 hour, unmindful of my mission, I yielded to your embrace. For your salvation too I am sent, if you will turn aside from your desires. Now here comes the key. The solace to end your sorrows comes not from the source from which they flow. Grace shall never be bestowed on you until that source is sealed to you. And these are obviously magnificent lines, but Kundry still does not understand. Finally, she, in mad desperation, tries to embrace Parsifal, and he pushes her away, saying, "Away, evil woman." Kundry's temptation has failed, and at this point she calls on Klingzor to destroy Parsifal after the castle collapse, and Parsifal says to her, "You know where you can find me again." The stage directions say he hurries away. Kundry raises herself a little and gazes after him. So now we come to Act 3 in the final redemption. One of the most important themes in this whole story of the separation and reunion of Spear and Grail is the separation and reunion of male and female. The spiritual equality of women with men was not only something that both the Buddha and Jesus emphasized in their teaching, it was also something that was very important to Wagner. And Wagner wrote in a letter to August Röckel in January of 1854, he said, "Not even Siegfried alone, man alone, is the complete human being. He is merely the half. Only with Brunhilde does he become the Redeemer. One man alone cannot do everything. Many are needed. And a suffering, self-immolating woman finally becomes the true conscious Redeemer. For it is love which is really the eternal feminine itself." In this letter, Wagner had been answering questions that Röckel had about the ring. And on June 6, 1881, Wagner and Cosima were discussing both Parsifal and Die Sieger, and she recorded, "We talk of the fact that in both, Parsifal and Sieger, more or less the same theme, the redemption of a woman, is treated. And this idea of the redemption of a woman is very important for the ending of the music drama Parsifal. For just as Die Sieger was about the redemption of Prakriti, who was later named Savitri, Parsifal is about the redemption of Kundry. And of course, it is also about the redemptions of Fortas, the Grail Brotherhood, Parsifal himself, the world, of course. But the reason that I am emphasizing Kundry is that there has been so much misunderstanding about Kundry, both in Wagner scholarship, directors' stagings of Parsifal, and in audiences around the world. In so many modern productions that I have seen, either live or on tape, Kundry lives at the end in direct contradiction to Wagner's explicit stage directions. And this may be very well intentioned, but it does not show an understanding of what Wagner wanted. My own feeling is that Wagner really knew what he was doing. And Kundry's death at the end of the opera is not negative. It is not removing all women from the stage, as some people have written. So let's look at what actually happens in Act 3. As Act 3 opens, Gurnemanz is living in a small hut near a spring. Gurnemanz hears piteous groaning and sees that it is Kundry, and he says to her, "Up, Kundry, up." This is reminiscent of Klingsor calling to her, saying, "Come up," as he too pulled her from sleep. But this time it is different. It is not the old karma calling to Kundry to wake once again into the nightmare of samsaric wandering. It is the voice of impending salvation calling to her for her final spiritual awakening. And Gurnemanz immediately notices this difference in her. And he says, has the holy day brought this about? It is Kundry who sees Parsifal coming. He is apparelled in black armor with a visored helmet and carries a lowered spear. The scene here is the same as in the traditional legends. And Wagner knew the traditional legends because he could read French as well as German. So Wagner had read the French versions and the German versions. So he knows exactly what he's doing here. So Gurnemanz tells Parsifal that it is the morning of Good Friday, and this again is what happens in the Grail legends. No one bears arms on such a day. Gurnemanz asks him to lay down his weapons, and Parsifal immediately obeys. He plants the spear in the ground and kneels before it in prayer. This is the resurrection of the World Ash-tree, again, of course, symbolically speaking. The spring outside Gurnemanz's hut is the spring of wisdom that ran dry when the branch was torn from the tree. So the branch has now been returned, and the tree and spring are once again united and revitalized, and the dark winter of the wasteland has given way to the dawning of spring. The waters once again flow, and nature is green with life. So what Wagner is doing, symbolically, of course, he's joining the very beginning of the Rheingold to the end of Parsifal. So that as the Spear and Grail is split at the beginning of the ring, now it's being joined back together in Act 3 of Parsifal. And this means not only is the Grail coming back, the spear is coming back, so is the spring coming back. No, here's the tree of life reborn, so to speak. So we're coming back to the Garden of Eden, if you want to see it in these terms. And again, people can see this in a lot of terms. I'm explaining it in one way, but there are many ways that you can all see this. When Parsifal takes off his helmet, he kneels before the spear, and Gurnemanz and Kundry both recognize him, and he them. When Gurnemanz asks him to whom was he asking the way during his wanderings, Parsifal answers, "To him whose deep lamenting I once heard in foolish wonder, to bring him salvation, I dare think myself ordained. But an evil curse drove me about in trackless wandering, never to find the way to healing. Numberless dangers, battles, and conflicts forced me from my path, even though I thought I knew it. Then I was forced to despair of holding unsullied the treasure, to defend and guard which I earned wounds from every weapon. To defend and guard which I earned wounds from every weapon, for I dared not will this itself in conflict. Unprofaned, I have borne it beside me and now bring it home, gleaming clean and bright before you, the holy spear of the Grail." So Parsifal has taken the final step in the final renunciation of violence, taking upon himself the wounds of countless weapons without returning them, and refusing to wield the sacred spear in battle or to use it for harm. By taking upon himself these wounds and not returning them, he has cleansed the karma from all of the violence of his past lives, and specifically the past life of Siegfried. Gurnemanz now exclaims, "O mercy, boundless grace, O wonder, holy highest wonder." In German, that's Heilig Herstes Wunder. And where have we heard that before? O Herstes Wunder from Die Walküre. This is virtually the exact exclamation made by Singlinde to Brunhilde when she heard that the child in her womb was, and I see Emma is nodding. This is the exact, O Herstes Wunder is what Sieglinde says to Brunhilde when she heard that the child in her womb would be the great hero Siegfried. And now here stands Parsifal about to perform the healing of Amfortas. The redemption of the world, so long awaited, is now at hand. So you see the whole thing is coming full circle. Kundry has one more part to play in this whole saga of redemption. When Parsifal has one final doubt, blaming himself for not healing Amfortas sooner, Gurnemat and Kundry revive him with water from the holy spring. Parsifal then scoops water from the spring and, bending over Kundry, who is kneeling before him, says, "My first office I thus perform. Receive this baptism and believe in the Redeemer." And this baptism of Kundry is her long-awaited redemption. And it is not long now before she will enter parinirvana, the eternal enlightenment that the Buddha entered when he left this earth in Kushinagara. This means that Kundry is going to become a female Buddha. The time has come now for the final reunion of Spear and Grail. The knights are demanding that Amfortas perform the Grail ceremony, but he cannot do it. He begs the knights to kill him, but the knights know that they cannot illuminate the Grail by killing their king. They shrink back from Amfortas, and Parsifal steps forward, touching the side of Amfortas with the spear, thus healing him. But one weapon serves. Only the spear that smote you can heal your wound. Be whole, absolved, and atoned, for now I will perform your task. O blessed be your suffering that gave pity's mighty power and wisdom's might to the timorous fool. I bring back to you the holy spear. O supreme joy of this miracle, this that could heal your wound, I see pouring with holy blood, yearning for that kindred fount which flows in wells within the Grail. No more shall it be hidden. Uncover the Grail, open the shrine. As the chorus sings, "Miracle of supreme salvation, our Redeemer redeemed," Kundry, in Wagner's stage directions, slowly sinks lifeless to the ground in front of Parsifal, her eyes uplifted to him. This is Kundry's entrance into parinirvana. All her karma has been cleansed, and there is no longer anything to bind her to earthly life. Parsifal is the designated redeemer of this time and place, and it is he who becomes the new Grail king, keeping the Grail alive in the world for the benefit of all beings. Kundry has accomplished what was necessary in this lifetime, and now her karmic stream has run its course. The drop has slipped into the sea. She leaves her body and enters the state of eternal meditation, forever at one with the great Dharmakaya, the great body of truth. So this is Kundry becoming a female Buddha. It is very important to understand that enlightenment is beyond the differentiation of gender. By ordaining women as full monks, bhikkhunis, the Buddha made it explicitly clear that there was no difference spiritually between men and women. Both have the Buddha nature equally, and both have the ability to attain full enlightenment. And Wagner also specifies this. Cosima recorded on June 27th, 1880. He then plays the first theme of Parsifal to himself, and returning, says that he gave the words to a chorus so that the effect would be neither masculine nor feminine. Christ must be entirely sexless, neither man nor woman. The spear is pouring with holy blood, yearning for that kindred fount which flows and wells within the Grail. Male and female have become inextricably one, the blood flowing equally from spear and Grail. Spirit is flowing into spirit. The true communion has been found in the third position beyond the opposites. What Wagner originally conceived in Die Sieger has been actualized in Parsifal, the salvation through union of male and female, not in a romantic context, but in a spiritual one. Parsifal and Kundry, one remaining and one departing, still at one forever, in that eternal union beyond birth and death. So I know that was a lot. And so we can have questions now. I'll let Andrew take over. I'm willing to answer your questions because I know this is a lot and it's a lot to absorb. So I'll do my best to answer the questions now.
Well, thank you very much, Paul. That was a very enlightening lecture. Um, Having just read your book again for the second time, I read it when it first came out, and I read it again now. You did a remarkable job of uh, compacting a lot of information into this lecture. You cover a lot of ground, definitely. Did you want to comment about if anybody's interested in purchasing your book, where they might go, how they might go about it?
Yeah, I can mention this very quickly. The original publisher was Amadeus Press, and this book got sold, or not this book, Amadeus Press, which was under the umbrella of a bigger publisher. Amadeus Press got sold to another publisher and then to Bloomsbury Press. So Bloomsbury Press is the one that now has it, and they have it for a reduced price. Let's see, Amazon has it, but I don't think it's for a reduced price. Bloomsbury Publishing or Bloomsbury, I think it's Bloomsbury Publishing. If you want to, you can order straight from them. And I think they would give you a better price right now than Amazon, but you can check all that out. So even though for those of you who see the book, it'll say Amadeus Press, but now it is Bloomsbury Press or Bloomsbury Publishing.
I did notice the book on sale at the San Francisco Opera.
Yes.
Store.
Yes, I've been told that, in fact, I think Andy, it was you who told me via email. Yes, I think it's in the opera shop, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Right. So you can also get it at, when you go to the performances. I'll be seeing the November 2nd performance via streaming because with the airlines the way it is right now here, I'm isolated in Crescent City and we don't have a very good shuttle flight. So I'm going to see it through streaming rather than being there. Otherwise, I'd be there with all of you, which would be what I'd really prefer. But sometime that'll happen, I think. But anyway, I'll be able to watch it, and hopefully all of you will see what they're doing. I have no idea what this new production is like. I saw the old one, but I haven't read anything about this one, so I'll need to find out. I'm not reading about it on purpose. I want to see it, right out of the chute, so to speak.
I have one question.
Yes,
What
yeah.
what do you think of the tradition that is now basically fading away, but what used to be a tradition of not applauding after the first act of Parsifal?
My understanding is that that was for Bayreuth. And
Uh,
it's when I was in Bayreuth, that's how they did it. They did not applause after the first act or the third act. They did applause after the second. In America, I've seen productions in various places in America. I think that Wagner was talking about Bayreuth because he originally said that Parsifal was only to be performed at Bayreuth. He allowed his other music dramas, like The Ring and Tristan, to be performed other places. But my understanding, I hope I'm not wrong in this, my understanding is that what he says in that regard, Andy, is for Bayreuth. I don't think it has to be done here in America.
And the second part of that question, in my understanding, the reason to withhold applause is because it was to be the first act, especially, was to be considered virtually a religious ceremony, and you don't applaud in church. You see,
Yes, that's correct. That's definitely correct, and that's why in Bayreuth he didn't have them applaud, but after the first act or the third. In fact, the whole opera really it's a consecration festival play.
yeah.
Really, to me, the whole opera is a religious service. not just, Act One and Part Three, Act Three. I think I personally would be fine if people in America didn't applaud. That would be fine by me until the curtain calls. If people want to um, have it be a religious service, that's perfectly fine with me. But I don't particularly mind applauding during a religious service if you really like it. So I don't know what everybody would say about that, but if in a religious service, it's very moving and someone starts applauding or otherwise showing joy, that's okay by me.
I was actually once at a religious service where the congregation actually did applaud.
Right.
There are a couple questions here. Um, One from John Chilcott. Aloha from Hawaii, Paul.
Yes,
Nice,
hi, hi.
yeah, nice to see you after all these years. Very interesting lecture. My question is, Nietzsche thought Parsifal not at an advancement toward not an advancement not at an advancement towards wisdom, but as a step backward. Is Nietzsche off the mark?
Yes, yes. Thank you for asking that question, John, because Nietzsche, you know about Nietzsche contra Wagner and all that. I don't have to tell you about that. Um, Nietzsche very badly misunderstood Parsifal, and what he misunderstood was the nature of the religion in it. Nietzsche, who was very anti-Christian, thought that Parsifal was a Christian opera, and therefore he rebelled against it. But Parsifal is not Christian. As I mentioned at the beginning, I think I covered this at the beginning, John. I'll go over it very quickly if you want, because it is important. I'll just do it out of my head here. What happens is that Wagner is not trying to promote any one religion. He's not trying to convert anyone to any one religion. He's using religion symbolically. And what is happening, in fact, the um, quote is so good, I just want to do it really quickly. What Barry Millington says, the value of religion, therefore, was to be found not in a fundamental acceptance of its tenets, but in a presentation in symbolic form of its universal spiritual truths. This is what Wagner is doing, and this is what Nietzsche missed. Is that he missed? I'm very surprised because Nietzsche was normally pretty good, but I think you probably all know Nietzsche had a very bad case of syphilis, and as his life went on, the syphilis worked out on his brain more and more until finally his brain collapsed. And Nietzsche had originally written his first book, The Birth of Tragedy Through the Spirit of Music, which Nietzsche wrote very much under the influence of Wagner. And later in his life, he broke with Wagner over two main things, Parsifal being Christian, and what had happened, unfortunately, in their personal life was that Wagner was friends with Nietzsche. He was like a father to Nietzsche. And at one point, Nietzsche was getting very ill and was seeing a doctor. And Wagner contacted the doctor, and with all best of intentions, the doctor told Wagner what was going on health-wise with Nietzsche. When Nietzsche found out about that, he felt very betrayed. He thought that his own information that should not have been shared with others was shared, and he resented that. But the main thing is that he didn't understand that Parsifal is not Christian. It's using all of these different traditions. It's Buddhist, it's Hindu, it's Wagner, it's pagan, it's mystery tradition. It's all of these together in one. It's not just one or the other. And this is what Nietzsche missed so badly. So what I would say to everyone, don't listen to Nietzsche here, because with all due respect to Nietzsche in the ways that he did write that first book, which was very, very good. And I can recommend it, The Birth of Tragedy, to everyone. However, I would say in terms of the Nietzsche contra Wagner, let that one go, because Nietzsche's perception of Parsifal is not the right one.
Um, Along that line, you've sort of already answered the question, but you may have heard the argument from people who are quick to point out Wagner's well-known anti-Semitism that he wrote that he allegedly wrote Parsifal as a means of developing a non-Jewish Christ, an Aryan Christ, so to speak.
This is bunk. Forgive me for being, not professorial in that. No, I've encountered this over and over and over my whole life, or at least my whole Wagner life. And there's a terrible misunderstanding in this regard. I'll try to make this as brief as possible, because this would be a whole lecture in and of itself. In 1850, Wagner wrote an article on Jewishness in music. And the gist of that article is that Wagner complained about the effect that he thought Jewish music and culture was having on German culture. He was not criticizing the Jewish race. And this is what has been so badly misunderstood. He was criticizing his view of Jewish music and culture. And he did say some very nasty things. Even Wagner's friends said, "Oh my God, why did you write this? Can't you just let this go?" Even Liszt just kind of shook his head and went like that. But Wagner was not condemning the whole Jewish race. That's not the idea of this article. And I can mention a couple of things that happened later in Wagner's life. Number one, in the late 1870s, Cosima and Wagner were going over all of the articles and things like that, pamphlets that he had written, and wondering what should we republish. And the on Jewishness in music came up, and Cosima didn't want to republish it, and Wagner didn't want to republish it. And again, this is during the time when he's writing Parsifal. And Wagner said, and this is in the diaries of Cosima, Wagner said, "If I were to write again about the Jewish people, I would say I have nothing against them. The problem is they came to us Germans at a time when we were not ready for them." And what Wagner is referring to here is a period in Jewish history, German history, when the Jews were being expelled from other countries like Spain and Italy, for example, and Germany and Russia were two of the countries that took them in. And people can ask, why are there so many, Russian Jews, or why are there so many German Jews? One of the reasons, at least, is that during that period in the late Renaissance, when so many countries were expelling their Jews, Germany and Russia took them in. And this is what Wagner is referring to. They came to us Germans at a time when we weren't ready for them. But he's not condemning them. He even says, if I were to write again about the Jewish people, I would say I have nothing against them. And the second thing that people need to keep in mind is that, again, later in his life, there was at that time a new anti-Semitic organization that was kind of percolating in Germany. And they thought, oh, great, let's enroll Wagner. This would be a great fish to catch. So emissaries from the Anti-Semitic League came to Wagner and asked him to join. And he told them to get lost. Again, not to use the vernacular. He said, "I don't want anything to do with you." And he actually wrote a letter to the Bayreuth Blätter, the Bayreuth newspaper, in which he publicly divorced himself from the current German anti-Semitic movement. He wanted the public to know, I have nothing to do with these people. He was really adamant. He did not want to be associated with them. And what happens is that people do two things. They go back to the 1850 original article, which, again, even Wagner's friends didn't like that one. Okay, that got Wagner in trouble and he shouldn't have done it. But he did not reproduce it after 1869. And secondly, what people do is that they don't look at the details of Wagner's life. They hear, okay, Hitler liked Wagner's music. He played Wagner's music at the Nuremberg rallies, therefore Wagner is a Nazi. And then they don't go any farther. And this, of course, is complete, it's complete baloney. And so what people need to do is realize that the inner circle of Hitler's, I'll call them his cabinet, if I can call it that. His cabinet members came to him and said, the cabinet members of the Nazi Party came to Hitler and said, we should not be using this man's music at our rallies because what his operas are about is not what our agenda is about. And in 1936, Thomas Mann gave a lecture in Switzerland criticizing the Nazis for, as he put it, misappropriating Wagner's music. So we have evidence after evidence after evidence that there should be no connection at all between Wagner's operas and the Nazis. But people just don't look into all this. They don't read Wagner's biographies. They don't read his actual articles. They just hear certain things, draw all sorts of conclusions, and then the whole thing blows up. And very quickly, I can mention one more misunderstanding about Parsifal that is important because you're all going to be seeing it again. And that is Gobineau's theory. Emma, you know, and Andy, Andy, you know what I'm talking about with Gobineau. There are people, and I just throw up my hands at this, because I've seen written articles published in magazines interpreting Parsifal according to Gobineau's racial theories. These were not Wagner's racial theories, they were Gobineau's racial theories. And what happened is that Wagner in 1880 read the book by Gobineau is called, it's a French book, in English translation, it's The Inequality of the Human Races, I think would be the best way to translate it. The Inequality of the Human Races. He had written that book, and Wagner read the book because Wagner met Gobineau very briefly in Rome in 1876, but that was all, they just met. In 1880, Wagner met in Venice, he met Gobineau again. And this time they met and talked and everything like that. Wagner went home and read Gobineau's book. Now this is 1880. Wagner had completed the libretto to Parsifal in 1877. He didn't even know about the book in 1877. And in 1880, he's now well into the composition of Parsifal. So he reads Gobineau's book in 1880 after the libretto is finished, long after. And then he invites Gobineau to come to his house. And Cosima and Wagner host Gobineau a couple of times. They're friends because they like talking to each other about these particular things. But what people don't know is that when they hear that, they say, oh, therefore, Wagner must agree with Gobineau. And since he's composing Parsifal at that time, therefore Parsifal is about racial theories. You see the insanity here? And what happens is that what really happened, I should say, is that Wagner and Gobineau did talk about these things, but they had, according to Cosima, very heated discussions because they didn't agree. And so here's Wagner vehemently disagreeing with Gobineau's theories. And they could disagree and still remain friends because they liked talking about these things. But according to Cosima, they were having shouting matches at Wahnfried. But people don't know this. They don't know that Wagner disagreed so vehemently with Gobineau. They still look at Parsifal through Gobineau's racial theories, which is just crazy. It's completely insane. So what I would say to everybody, just drop all of that and look at Wagner. Look at Wagner himself. Forget all this rubbish. Just look at Wagner, because Wagner did know what he was doing. And if you really look at Wagner and stay with Wagner, this other stuff just falls away and it evaporates.
Thank you for that clarification. Question from Jen Kildner. She's puzzled why Wagner himself did not talk or write more explicitly about Parsifal as the continuation of the Ring. My understanding is that he spoke to Cosimo about that. Is that correct?
Well, yes, yeah. In fact, there are quite a few times when he's talking to Cosima, but he's also writing letters to people. And I'll give you several examples of this. After the 1882 performances, one of his friends, Bernard Forster, wrote a pamphlet about Parsifal, in which he says in that pamphlet, the stronghold of Valhalla turns into the temple of Monsalvat. And that's what Forster wrote in the pamphlet that was being given out to all the people. And Wagner approved of that. According to Cosima, Wagner approved of the idea of the Valhalla turning into the Temple of the Grail. So there's one direct by Wagner himself. He didn't write it himself. It was Forster who wrote it, but Wagner is saying, yes, I approve of that. So that's one example. And another time, Wagner is talking to Cosima, and she records this. And again, it's true, he's talking about this and not writing an article about it, but he is talking about it. And Wagner says to Cosima, Siegfried should have turned into Parsifal, and he should have come upon Wotan and redeemed Wotan, not Amfortas, but there was no precedent for this, so we'll have to keep it as it was. But the irony of that statement is that in the context of what we were just talking about today, Siegfried does turn into Parsifal, and he does come across Wotan and redeem Wotan. Wotan reincarnated as Amfortas. So you see the connection here? So the connection is there, even if Wagner doesn't specifically say it. And one of the things that he said, he did make Wagner himself to Cosima. Again, he's talking to Cosima. He's not writing it himself, but everybody can read this in the diaries. Wagner makes the connection that Wotan becomes Titurel. And in my book, I explain that. I say, yes, Wagner said that in essence, Titurel is the reincarnation of Wotan. I explain in my book why it's Amfortas in my way of seeing it. But even though it's different in the regard of the son versus the father, what we can see with Wagner's idea of Wotan reincarnating as Titurel, we're still seeing a character from the Ring reincarnating into the opera Parsifal, aren't we? And that comes from Wagner himself. So it's not that he has to write it for it to be there. It's a good question because it's true Wagner never said himself Parsifal is the fifth opera of the Ring. But if you read all of the things that he wrote to his friends, if you read Cosima's diaries, and you look at what's actually happening that we talk about today, it's there all along. The whole idea is there right from the beginning. And one more thing I'll mention about Wagner not specifying it the way that I did in the detail I did. Remember when we go back to the quotation from Robert Gutmann, and let me find it very quickly here, because it's a good way to talk about this. What Gutmann says is, despite the turgid prose, a reader with knowledge of the completed cycle of Wagner's masterworks is thrilled to perceive in this essay what the struggling young genius could himself only dimly apprehend. You see what I mean here? Or what Gutmann is meaning. What Gutmann is pointing to is that, yes, this whole thing happened over a 37-year period. Wagner was not apprehending all of this all at once. In other words, do you see what I mean, Andy, and the person who is asking the question? Wagner didn't have all of this ironed out the way I presented it. I have the advantage of 150 years later, don't I? So I can look back at all of this. I can read the biographies. I can read the diaries. I can read all of the letters that he wrote, which I've done. I've read as many letters as I think have been translated into English. And I can see all of this and I can lay it out because now I have the vantage point of having been removed this far from it. Wagner was in the process of thinking of all these things all at once. Remember, I said at one point during the lecture, all of these ideas are percolating in Wagner's creative mind all at the same time. As you all know, he stopped writing The Ring and finished Tristan and Meistersinging, then he went back to The Ring. all of this is percolating in his mind all at once. He reads Wolfram's Parsifal in 1845. It's 37 years later that he performs his own opera. And so it's true, Wagner does not himself specify everything throughout these 37 years because he isn't apprehending all this. But let me do one thing here, because this does go right to the question. This is a short paragraph. This is written by Wagner to Rückel, and he's talking about the ring. He's talking about the ring, and he's talking about looking back at something that he had written later, and looking back later on something that he had written earlier. I was scarcely aware that in the working out, nay, in the first elaboration of my scheme, I was being unconsciously guided by a wholly different, infinitely more profound intuition, the consequence of which was that as I was true to my living intuitions and not to my abstract ideas in my completed work, something quite different saw the light from what I had originally intended. Does everyone understand? I can see two people here if they nod their heads. Is that clear to everybody? In other words, what's happening here is that Wagner goes back to something he's already written and sees new things in it. He hadn't even intended it, but it's there. And Pete Seeger had said one time, there's always more in a good song than the original songwriter originally intended. It's always more. And I see Emma here nodding her head. So yes, this again, it's a very good question. And the simple answer is it's all there, even if Wagner didn't specify it line by line by line by line. It means that we can see it like this. So, and that's why I want an actual 5 opera cycle performance, so that people can see right from the start of the ring all the way through, and we see the story that begins in the ring ends in Parsifal. And Wagner never said to perform it, but I would like to see that happening, and that's why Spate and I talked about it, because Spate said yes, it can be done, and all it needs. In fact, what happened right after 2008, when the book came out, and we were talking the reviews came out, they were really good and all of that. And then at the end of the year, here comes the crash, and all of a sudden no one has any money. And so what we're going to need is to try to get back on our feet and have opera companies, whether it's the Met, whether it's somewhere in Europe, whether it's Bayreuth, go ahead and do a 5 opera cycle. Because I literally do believe that this is not theoretical, this is literal. Yeah, go ahead, Andrew. Andy, I'll just say something.
In the interest of time, I'm going to give you just 2 more questions.
Yeah, okay.
I wrap it up. One question from John Byrne. In the ring operas, are there elements of karma that drive a character's actions, or are they the result of it?
This is, let me think just for a minute how to answer that. Because karma, we both inherit karma from our previous life, and we make karma as we live in this life. And we're also cleansing karma in this life. And we're also making more of it in certain way. And then we go on to our next incarnation. And so in essence, it's fluid. So the answer to that question is yes. The ring characters are both being driven by the previous karma and by their desires in this lifetime. And so when Wotan breaks a branch off the ash tree and forges it into a spear of power, he's not only reacting to a previous life, he's reacting to his desire in this life, which is creating karma in this life. And that karma comes to fruition in his life as Amfortas. And so again, it's a good question. I could spend an hour on that, but I'll say yes, it's true that in the ring, the characters are both dealing with karma from before, and they're creating karma right away in their actions in the ring, and those actions are going to carry over into Parsifal.
Okay. And then another question from Jan Kilner, and this I think we'll make this our final question.
Okay.
Uh, a a key concept in Parsifal is that of the holy fool or the wise fool. You have not mentioned that, so how does it fit into your framework?
Yes, I did mention it in terms of the quote from the libretto, the innocent fool enlightened through compassion. The innocent fool, there are two answers to that. One is it can be looked at as Taoism, an influence of Taoism, because the Zen master or the Taoist master in Taoism is referred to as the fool on the hill. And the reason is that um, society will look at the enlightened master and not understand the action sometimes. So he's seen as a fool. Oh, he's just a fool on the hill. Don't worry about him. He's a little light in the head, etc. Where it's actually enlightened action that people in society can't understand. So that's one reference. The other reference is that Wagner misunderstood the etymology of foul parsi. Scholars have now debunked this. Um, the person that one of the people that Wagner was reading during his life thought that Parsifal came from foul Parsi, innocent fool.
Mhm.
But scholars, and I'm taking their word for it here, scholars are now debunking that. They're saying that that's not it. That was a wrong etymology. And it comes from an Arabic language. Wagner thought that that's what it was. So he's using innocent fool. But the what I say in my book is that Parsifal is not from Arabic. Parsifal is the German from Percival. Percival is Welsh. Well, actually, Percival is the French from the Welsh Peredur. So Peredur is the Welsh Percival. Percival is the French. That comes from Chrétien de Troyes. And Percival does not mean innocent fool. Percival means pierced through the middle. Can I see a nod here or there? Is that understood? If you take the French, this is Old French. This is not modern French. This is Old French. And the German that Wolfram was writing in was Middle High German. So Parsifal is middle. In fact, Parzival is what it is. It's P-A-R-Z, Parzival. Parsifal in Middle High German. And so that becomes Parsifal in Wagner. And Percival is where Parsifal comes from, not Fal Parsi. So Percival from the French means pierced through the middle. So where does this, and I do explain this in the book. Percival, pierced through the middle, is the Buddha's middle way. And remember, I did mention earlier about the Buddha giving up the extremes. The extreme asceticism was not the way, that he found the middle way, which is both the middle way, the middle path in between the two extremes. It's also spiritually the third position beyond the opposites. And the third position beyond the opposites is the Buddha mind, ultimately, at the highest level. So the idea of pierced through the middle is the middle way. And do we have time for me to get my Wolfram book and read just a couple sentences? Is that okay?
Yes, go for it. This is all very interesting
Oh yeah,
and yeah, and very fascinating.
and,
And
and
I do have a couple of questions which I want to ask, and I wonder if and the people are still here, nobody left.
I'll just state for the members also, his book is actually quite fascinating. I've read it twice. When it first came out, and I just reread it now. And it's a relatively easy read too. I mean, I didn't have to struggle to get through it. It flows quite nicely.
Yes. I wanted to quote it rather than just paraphrasing it, because the quote is so good. This is the middle way. It's right here in Wolfram. And this is how the name Parsifal should be understood in terms of etymology. Give me just a second here. Again, it's not foul Parsi, it's not innocent fool, but you can see innocent fool from the point of view of the Taoist master, the fool on the hill, if you want to. You can also say innocent fool in terms of someone who is let go all the karma and therefore is innocent in the sense of not having any more negative reproductive karma. You can see the idea of fool that way. Okay, here it is. This is Wolfram's own words, and it's the end of Parsifal, his Parsifal, and it's the middle way. This is his way of describing even though Wolfram didn't, as far as I know anything about Buddhism, he is describing the Buddhist middle way really well right here. A life so concluded that God is not robbed of the soul through fault of the body, and which can obtain the world's favor with dignity, that is a worthy work. Should I read this again, Emma, or did that come across?
Yes, please read it again.
Keep in mind, this is both the middle way in between the extremes, and it's the third position beyond the opposites. A life so concluded that God is not robbed of the soul through fault of the body, which can obtain the world's favor with dignity, that is a worthy work. So what it means here spiritually, so God so concluded that God is not robbed of the soul through fault of the body. The fault of the body would be constant sex and drugs and all sorts of stuff. You're robbing the soul here. That is your extreme. You've gone all the way, to one side, and now you're just ruining everything. So the idea is not robbed of the soul through fault of the body. That is, the body will still have the fault in the sense that we're human, but we can lead a life in the middle way. That means we might, if we like, I don't personally drink because I was, a monk and everything. But let's say you like a beer after work. That's perfectly okay. That's not robbing the soul from fault of the body. If you get drunk every night, that's robbing the soul because of the fault of the body. So is that understood here, the idea of the middle way there?
Yeah.
So then he says, and which can obtain the world's favor with dignity. So that is the world's favor. Sometimes the world gets so decrepit that the only way you can make it in the world is to be decrepit. But the idea of being dignified, if you can, with dignity, live your life with dignity and also obtain the world's favor, you've lived a worthy life. Then, do you see the middle way here? Is that coming through okay?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so that's how I would answer the question. It's not Fal Parsi, it's Parsifal, it's the middle way, it's enlightenment. That's what the real etymology is.
Well, thank you, Paul.
Right.
Other questions, unfortunately, we're going to have to leave unanswered because it's already 3 o'clock. Obviously, you've sparked a lot of interest in
Right.
our members based on the questions that they've sent in. And, we could be here till midnight talking about it.
Well,
But
Steve Sokol and I often were.
so I'll just tell the members, get a copy of Paul's book because it's a very enlightening read. And, for whatever questions you might still have, I'll tell you, get the book, read it. So thank you very much, Paul. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me too.
Thank you to our members who attended. We will look forward to seeing you at the future Wagner Society events, especially the Cosima event. Buy your tickets now, or you'll regret it eternally. So thanks again, Paul. And well, you and I and Emma will be chatting again in just a few minutes. After we'll let our members sign off for right now. Thank you, everybody.